Supplemental information in the New Testament that discusses the creation that we won't need to move on to. So next week we probably are going to get to Genesis 4 through at least 6, where we talk about the introduction of sin into the world, and ultimately to the point where it gets so bad on the earth where God has to literally deal with it straightforward and head on. So those few chapters are planned for next week, but we'll see how our class goes. Now, I don't claim to be an expert on the creation. I love to read, and so I like to do a lot of fact finding as far as information about science and archaeology and things of that nature, but I don't claim to be a scientist, which I'm not. I read them. So if you have questions about some of these, if you don't know it already, I will hit up those that I do consider to be authoritative on the subject matter or the question that you have. There is no question that I consider to be a dumb question. I've heard it said, and I believe it, the only dumb question is the one never asked, right? Because questions show what? It shows that our minds are working. It shows that they're inquisitive, that they want to learn. And if there's anything about the account, the scriptures, that needs clarification, please mention. If you have comments, again, please mention. I'd love to get feedback. I love to get sharing. So if you have some information you want to add about anything that we discuss, or questions about anything that we discuss, please feel free. It is a class session, and so the point being is for us together to come to a common knowledge a little better than when we arrived. Yes.
Is there any sheets that come?
Yes, we do. Matter of fact, we have an outline of. There's a few outlines there if you didn't get one. And in just a second, I'm going to hand out Higamoris. I'll give you one from last week. If you want a study guide from last week, I have them here because I did have a few type errors in there that hopefully I corrected with the sake of one. This was last week. You might want to write verse 7. It's James 5:7-11. That's the only one I didn't get to. I missed that one. So I wanted you to be able to have a new outline for this week and also a revised one from last week. This one's going to be today.
And what are these?
This, I don't even know why that's here. Is this yours? I gave it to you? Well, this is the class.
Over there.
Yeah, I think
it was
Eric.
Eric.
Stay here. Stay here. Take away. Don't leave. So this is James 5.
That was last week. I haven't handed you one from this week yet. So turn in your Bibles to Genesis chapter 1.
Okay.
And then I'm going to give you a handout. And what we're going to do is we're going to read day by day. We're going to talk about what it is that God made on those days. I don't expect to really spend a whole lot of time there because it should be, unless I'm an antagonist, it should be pretty straightforward. There are those that don't believe that Genesis is a literal historical account, but let's just say that outside of Genesis, God, both in the Old Testament, in the law, literally states that He made everything in 6 days. And on the 7th day, He rested. Now, on your handout, you'll notice I don't have day 7, because guess what happened on day 7? Nothing. So it would be pretty boring to put that on there. I put day 7, nothing. You know, so let me go ahead and hand these out to you. You can spread them around. But like I was saying, that there are those that are antagonistic to the historical account. Don't think it's literal. There are some things that are that may be hidden between the lines that aren't there, which may answer some of the objections to, like, for instance, have you ever heard arguments about the age of the earth? Now, just so you know, I really don't believe the Bible at all was ever written with the intent of giving you an exact chronological time frame for which things transpired. I can prove to you that there are literally gaps, large gaps in the historical account, first of all, in Genesis chapter 1 through 3, through 4, where you could literally put as much time in there as you want. Meaning, it wasn't meant to say, as soon as this happened right away. There are times when there's generalities used, like in Genesis chapter 4, when Adam and Eve were there. We don't know how long they were there in the garden. We know that we have an account of their age, but their age comes after they began to age, which was after they sinned. So the question someone might ask is, how long were they in the garden? We don't know. Their point wasn't to give an exact amount of time. But in Genesis chapter 4, it does say, over the course of time, Adam laid with Eve and she conceived. She had a child. How much is a course of time? We don't know. Could that be 5 years, 10 years, 100 years? We know that they lived to be hundreds of years old, right? And again, there's a lot of guessing going on there. I'll tell you what I've heard, what might be a logical explanation for the age. Because have you ever read the ages of the people in Genesis? Mm-hmm. They're quite extraordinary. Who can tell me the oldest man who ever lived? No, Keith, you can't tell me.
900 years, was it Noah?
No, but nice try. Anyone else? Emily. Methuselah. And how old was he? See, what a bright girl. You have to be a preacher's daughter, so she might know that answer.
He knows that way.
969 years old. Can you imagine living 969 years? No! I know I can't. You know, living 53, and it feels like a long time, you know? But 969, that's incredible. And, you know, so there's some thoughts as to why. John and I are pretty much on the same page as the logical probability as to why men live so long. Because as you kind of page through Genesis, you notice something pretty clearly. That here they lived a long time. At some point, guess what? The age is reduced drastically. And after a particular point in time, the ages pretty much became static, which means they were really high, they dropped really fast, and then they stayed static from there on. So then you would have to surmise, using your logical brain, that something happened in between there which changed the natural order, which changed the way things were occurring. Specifically the ages in which not just man, I imagine everything lived, which might give an explanation for some of the dinosaurs. I don't know if it explains all of them, but I understand some animals don't stop growing until they die. So imagine that that animal lived hundreds of years longer than he does now, or it does now. Might it be 10 times as big? And what might it look like? I don't know. So there's some things that are in there, and there are things that aren't in there. Again, I really don't believe the point of Genesis 1 on was intended to give you a detailed account of everything that takes place, or was it intended to answer all of the questions as into how things began in the beginning. We do know it is an historical account because it is used by reputable individuals whose integrity is not questionable because of their high integrity, where they quote the Genesis account as factual. And so if one were to say it's not a factual account or record, then you would have to find a way to discredit all of the reputable people who do quote from Genesis, namely Jesus and other individuals of high reputation, which never had any reason to give anyone question, even in his day or afterwards, that his integrity was not genuine, right? So if they're quoting it, citing it as an actual historical account, then we have to go on that assumption until somebody can come along and give a greater reason why that integrity should be put into question and the account itself be put into question. Does that make sense? And so, again, what would be, from what we talked about last week, what would be, you think, the real reason in which God is recording for us, because it had to be God, through, we understand Moses to be the record keeper of the account of the Genesis account. What would you think God's purpose for communicating to us how things began? Did he have to? No. We have lots of things that we don't know, how they got there. But we have this account. So why would you think ultimately God would have wanted to record these 6 days as into what happened and how things came about? What would you think as a guess? Because I don't know if there's an exact answer other than what we might have hinted at from last week. What do you think?
Well, just because of that. You weren't there, so you don't know. So he's telling you, I did this. This is how you came about, or humans came about. Mm-hmm. The earth came about, animals, everything. He's the creator. So
good.
He gets that.
Hopefully, it's the conclusions that come from it, because mankind, we tend to want and desire a relationship. It seems to be built into us. One author once equated it to a holy space, an empty space that God built inside of our soul that only God can fill. And that over life we try to fill it with what? Everything that we think will bring us peace, joy, happiness, the things that we crave for, but they don't seem to do it until we find a relationship with God, and then all of a sudden it fits right where it should be, because he intended to be and wanted to be in making us very intimate. We see in the very beginning, without kind of going into it, hoping not some of the material for next week, but we find that God is said to be walking in the cool of the evening with Adam, having discussions. I don't know how many he had, but I know one of them is that he would bring him all of the animals that he made, and just to see what he would name them. And so there was a lot of intimacy going on in the beginning before sin entered into the equation. And so one of the real answers might be that God built this or wrote this down so that we could see how God intended it to be before things got messed up. And then we see in the New Testament how God promises to restore that. Not so much restore the creation to its original, because it's really clear in the New Testament that there is a point in which all of this is going to go away. So anyone that tries to tell you that God meant this to be eternal is not looking honestly at the Bible. There, Hebrews chapter 1, 2 Peter chapter 3, just to name a few, where God mentions a fire that's going to destroy even the elements. Everything will be burned up. So this world was made with the intent of putting us on it. So when we're gone, what's the point of it, right? The point would be pointless, right? And so therefore God would remove it because it doesn't have its purpose anymore. So his reason for probably writing this account down is so that we could see how God made it to be. When he built this world for us, my dad used to say, what do you think, the world revolves around you? Anyone ever heard that one? And until I read the Bible, and I wanted to, but Dad, it does. Everything was built with us in mind. Isn't that neat? Everything was created so as to serve his highest creation, and that would be us. And also to kind of tell us that we are his highest creation, that we're fashioned in a way as to make us distinctively unique from everything else he's made, because there's literally a piece of him built right into us, and a part of us that's built into us that makes us different than the rest of creation. So let's look at Genesis. Let's turn to Genesis chapter 1. And let's you got your outline there? Everyone have their outline? Okay, we're going to be looking at Roman number 1, and we're going to just kind of go through and look at the verses that describe our creation and the account of creation. Let's start in chapter 1, verse 3. I'm skipping the first paragraph on purpose. We will revisit that down just a little bit. But let's, again, Joe, what we like to do is everyone take turns reading. If by chance, if there's somebody that feels uncomfortable for reading for whatever reason, you forgot your glasses or whatever and everything's a little blurry, just tap the guy next to you and say, you go. And we'll just keep right on going. So our first scripture is in Genesis chapter 1, verse 3 through 5.
And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God said, God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the mountain. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called it night. And the evening and the morning were the first day.
Okay, so on the first day, now, when it says in the beginning that God created the heavens and the earth, okay, there is probably one of those space things that I talked about. How long was it before God made light? After he made the heavens and the earth? How much time had transpired? Can anyone tell me from the record? Could it have been 5 billion years? To God, would 5 billion years have been anything? No, what if it really did take that long for what he had put into motion by his own? There are natural laws all over the place that he doesn't touch. He started them in motion. How long does it take for a child to gestate in the womb of a woman to become a being that could live outside the womb? 9 months. You know, did God dictate that? Yes. Why 9 months? I don't know. You know, so when he created the world, we have no idea how much time took place there. We just know that it says he made it, and then he mentions, okay, here's what he would call day one. Now, interesting thing here, have you ever read this verse? Have you ever read the account before? Is there anyone that hasn't read it before? Good. Everyone has. Have you ever wondered what the light is there? I assumed for a very long time that the light was what we normally call light. What do we normally call light?
Sun.
The sun, right? Because when the sun comes up, it gives us daylight, right?
Mm-hmm.
When the sun goes down, there's no light except for what happens to shine, you know, in the sky, which would be the moon or the stars or now we know other galaxies that are up there. But this light isn't the sun. Did you all know that?
No.
That this light is not the sun. Because we find out on a later day, he created the greater light, which is the sun. And so up to that point, then there was no sun. So then what would you guess? Again, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer there, but what might you guess that light was?
Blank sheet of paper.
Huh?
Like a blank sheet of paper, just white.
I want to say it was
Okay.
him, but he was there.
It's his
Except that he
presence.
wasn't created, so good thought.
I mean,
Not a wrong guess, but
It's his presence. He was separating, right? Well, it's void, right? There's nothing, and so he enters into nothing, and so he separates it. It's,
no, that's a good thought. Nothing wrong with that thought.
okay.
Might it be energy? Because since energy is a thing, you know, and it had to have a point of creation, and everything is made up of energy, right? Atoms that are constantly moving, right? Creating motion and energy. It might be, and that's the best guess I've thought of, or heard anyone else come up with. Not other ones I heard of, and I don't necessarily rule out, but to me, I'm just like, you know, it doesn't seem as rational or reasonable to me. Energy makes sense, because from energy comes what? Everything else. So it makes sense that on the first day, he explodes the massive amount of energy that's required to build stars, right? And matter and everything, right? And so day one, even though it says light, you might want to write down beside it and what you might think it'd be. I mean, if you like the word, if you like the thought of energy, then put that down. Where on day one, God created energy. Now, it's interesting also to note that he mentions day one when, how do we generate days? How do we separate days?
When it's the cycle of the
Night to morning, but then how do we determine that? There has to be,
Sun.
and it has to be that but there isn't yet. So I don't know quite how he's differentiating the light in the day here. I don't know. I know it's not the same way that we're thinking logically right now, when the sun comes up and when the sun comes down, and the literal march of 12 hours of time due to the revolution of the earth, right? So it's different. I don't know exactly what day, other than this just may be his determination of that beginning, calling it the first day. And also the Jewish calendar was formulated based upon the language here. We call a day what? What do we call a day? From what to what?
24 hours?
From morning to night. What is God calling a day? From night to morning. He has it reversed. From evening to the morning. So when the Jewish calendar is, how do they have a day transpiring?
Their Passover starts in the evening. And
In the night, and the day ends, where we go from 12 to 12, right? Somewhere there's some Gregorian calendar came along and sort of, I think it was, that changed the time from 12 to 12. But before then, it was nighttime was the beginning of the day. Now, the reason why that's important is because there's some things that transpire, or people that raise objections as into the credibility of the Bible. And they cite some time conflicts. Well, some of these might be solved by just trying to put ourselves in the time constraints of the people who are writing the Bible. Here's one really, really good example. How long was Jesus said to be in the grave? 3 days and 3 nights. Do you know that he was not in the grave? 24 hours?
Right.
3 days of 24-hour time? He wasn't in the grave. Literally, he was in the grave about a day and a half. But then the Bible says that he was in there for 3 days and 3 nights. Is there a conflict in the scriptures?
No.
There really isn't. The only way you can ever solve that mathematical equation, how do you get a day and a half and 3 days to agree? Well, the Jewish calendar, when you go through the New Testament and you go through the Gospels specifically, and you look for the time that was written about when he was killed, right, when he was crucified, and when he rose from the dead, what you find out is that he was killed on the day, at the part of the day that was at the end of the day, still being considered that day. It's like if you die at 11 p.m., when did you die? Yesterday. If it's 1 a.m., you died yesterday. And you died a day ago. Even though you died an hour ago, you still died a day ago, right? And so he was killed then in that day, but at the end of the day, that we would call, if we used our 12-hour, 24-hour time, in a different time frame. So when you're looking at the way the New Testament was written in the framework of what Genesis is saying, that the day actually begins at sundown, when Jesus was killed, was right at the end of the day, right before their new day begins, which is sundown. He was killed at what time? 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But to the Jewish mindset, this was another day. And so when sundown came, he had already been dead 1 day. And so he literally, the second day, was dead the whole day. And then he rose in the morning of the third day. And when you actually count the days and the nights, guess how many you get? 3 days and 3 nights. You literally, it's not making an exaggeration. You don't have to cram it in there to fit. You literally have 3 days and 3 nights, because he died in the end of 1 day, the end of 1 day, and at the end of the day, the morning, and the morning. You can actually literally find out just by reading the accounts, the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the records of his arrest, his death, his burial, and his resurrection, and you can literally place him being alive and dying and raising from the dead on 3 separate days and 3 separate nights. You know, and the only way you're going to fit that, the only way you can fit that, is if you put yourself in the mind frame of the ones who scribed the New Testament, which would have been from a Jewish perspective, from this account. If this wasn't literal, then it's all of a sudden going to make all of that real troublesome. But they were working from that perspective, from the way God started it, night and day, first day. It's all for free. All that had nothing to do. I didn't even plan to talk about it. But that's for free. Okay, let's go on day 2. You keep me on time, guys, please. We want to at least start number 2 before our first half of our class is over. What is, okay, let's move on. We're gonna go on to the second day, verse 6 through verse 8.
And God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day.
Okay, so what do we have on the second day? We have heaven or sky being created. So let's try in a way, if we can, because everything has changed. Just so you know, the way the earth was, what do they call it, antediluvian? The way it was before the flood was very different from the way you see it now. The world definitely did not appear the same way. If I'm looking at this in my mind, what picture does it paint for you?
The earth, the water and the land.
There seems to be a massive amount of water. Where? In the sky and on the earth. I don't know where the separation occurs, or if it even has occurred yet. It may be that the entire earth at this point is what? Completely water. It sounds like it was, because when land comes, he causes it to appear, which means it
wasn't there.
wasn't there. Right? We just use our brain. I mean, that's what we're going to use for. It wasn't there.
Right.
So at some point, it seems like in the beginning, when God created the earth itself, it was just a large ball. It was a massive rock, but covered completely with water. And so on this day, he causes a separation. What do your translations say? I know one says firmament. Anyone else has anything different other than firmament? A vault. Interesting. I have not heard that before. Mine says expanse. Or some of your translations say sky. Right? He caused a sky to appear, which means an expanse, a space, which means there wasn't one. Right? So he takes the water that's there and he separates it. Right? And so in your mind now, if he's separating it and names it heaven or sky or the firmament, right? If you're standing below, what are you seeing when you're looking up? A sea that's up above you. Now, I don't know how much expanse was there, right? But I guarantee it wasn't the same amount of expanse that we have now, right? Because that water is no longer there. Which might explain when some say there's not enough water in order for the entire world to have been covered completely with water. Well, if there was enough water at the beginning to cover everything, and it started that way, why would we think that there wasn't enough water for him to do it again? If he decided to do what with the water that was above? He could, if he separated, what could he do? Cause them to come back together just as easily as he separated them, right? Does that make sense? And so he calls it sky or heaven, firmament or expanse. And so literally by his power, he stretches the water apart. And he creates this middle area. By the way, there are, in the New Testament, how many heavens?
3.
There are 3 heavens. You're now reading of the first one. The first heavens is the description of the sky that's above us. The second is above that, which you could probably say as far as our universe will expand. And then more than likely the third heavens, which is described in 2 Corinthians, it's a different dimension where God lives, where the spiritual beings go, where we go when we leave this into a different dimensional place.
Is that where Jesus visited?
Where he is?
Where Jesus visited and told us about it?
Yes, and the only description of it at all is Paul, where Paul says that he was taken up in the, whether it's in the body or not, I'm not sure, he says. I was caught up into the third heavens, which he says is paradise, where he was allowed to see things that man is not allowed to see. For the reason I think of his ministry, he was going to be going through great lengths to spread the gospel of all the world. And so Jesus, God, whoever did it, gave him a glimpse of that third expanse, that place that we don't see until we part this life. Interesting thought, isn't it? So he separates it. Now there's this huge ball of water above. I don't know how much water was there. It doesn't say. It just says that's what he did, right? So any questions about what we see here? Good.
Some of that water receded into the earth.
Well, he separated it, right? And we'll find at some point he calls this, the water down here, something else. We'll find that out, right? The next thing, day 3. Let's read that. Joe? Was it Joe?
Yeah.
Joe, let's read day 3. I think it starts with
And
verse
God said-
9, right?
Yeah, verse 9. And God said, let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear. And so it was. God called the dry ground land, and gathered waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good.
Okay, so, oh no, we're not done, right?
So then God said, let land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees, and the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to the various kinds.
Down to 13.
And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it, and according to their kinds, that God saw that that was good. And there was an evening, and then there was a morning, the third day.
So we have the third day, and it seems like God was really busy on that day. Creates land, creates the sea. First time he names the water that's underneath the expanse, he called the first one sky, right?
Yeah.
Called the second one sea. He called the land that now he caused to come up out, which scientists now prove to be the Pangea, which was the continental mass that the earth has at one point to rise up. And it may be that the reason it rose up was because he caused all the water to go up. So it could be that just by the very circumstance of water going up, it also created the land. It would rise up. It may not have literally rose up. You know, it may have been there all along. Don't know. Or it literally could have been part of the earth's crust at some point, in which God just decided to separate from the crust and to cause that crust to come up. Interesting that moves, doesn't it? The way it does. Almost floats the way it does. It's kind of scary. I thought they were a massive floating barge. Several of them, I guess. So we have day 3. Now let's go on to day 4. Vince?
14.
Yeah.
Then God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons, and for days and for years, and let them be for lights in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth. And it was so. And God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. God set them in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. So the evening and the morning were the 4th day.
So on day 4, what does God make?
The sun and the moon.
The sun and the moon. What else did he make? All of the stars. What else? Since there was no lights in the heavens yet, we would have to say naturally, because we know now that there's galaxies up there. How many stars are up there? We're still trying to count them.
Lots of,
The more powerful our telescopes get, the more we become aware of that there's a whole lot more than we ever dreamt possible. And so there's lots of lights up there, right? Interesting things. Any questions about day?
well, I just wanna
4?
comment that
Yes.
back in chapter 3, and God said, let there be light, it's the different light than this one.
Had to be, right? It can't be the light. It's you
Yeah,
use
'cause
your.
at first you think it's
Isn't it
the sun.
amazing how God, He gave us a brain, that's really able to
But I
reason
never-
and deduce, and we would reason and deduce and know that the light that He made in verse 3 was not the light that He made here. That this had to be some other kind of light. Again, why I would guess it was energy, which is what all things are made of. When He starts to create, it would make sense that He's taking that energy and He's shaping it into whatever form, whether it be solid matter or balls of gas, doesn't matter. It's all coming from energy, right? So pretty interesting stuff, right? And believe me, there for the longest time there was a lot of this. I just didn't actually sit down and think about it long enough to think, no, wait a minute. That whole space thing in the beginning, I actually had to have somebody in a book write that. I said, there could be quite a long period of time in that first couple verses that we have no idea how long. It might just simply answer anyone's objection to where it couldn't be literally 7 days. Well, the actual shaping of everything was 6 days. But when He made the ball and He made the earth itself, we don't know how much time had transpired there. So it's quite possible to make science and the creation account agree if we look for those gaps that are obviously there. Okay, what's the next one?
5.
Okay, day 5, right? Let's read that. Jennifer?
And God said, let the water teem with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the vault of the sky. So God created the great creatures of the sea and every living thing with which the water teems and that moves about in it, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them and said, be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the water and the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth. And then there was evening, and then the morning of the fifth day.
So again, on day 5, it seems like God's really busy, because how many different land creatures do we have? Wow. Innumerable. Are we still discovering land creatures? Things that creep and crawl? We're naming species still even to this day. You thought we would have found them all by now, right? But we still haven't. That are so diverse. That's why I absolutely love watching the nature channels and watching all of the things about the sea. I just hate it where they try to recondition my mind to believe that God didn't do this. I don't know if you catch that, but almost every single one of them is built from the perspective that God had nothing to do with it. That is just stuff that took place over time and by itself. But if we want to come from God's perspective from this book, we have to see the Creator, and more importantly, the conclusions that should be drawn from the creation. And there are quite a few, as we're going to see in the rest of the Old Testament and the New Testament, that God wants us to see as a result of us knowing that He made it and put us on this place. So lots of things made on day 5, right? So let's go on day 6. What's our time frame?
20 minutes.
We still got 20 more minutes? Good. We're doing all right. Let's look on day 5. Who's day 5?
6.
Day 6, sorry. Day 6.
And God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and the creepy thing, and beast of the earth after his kind. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth after his kind, and the cattle after their kind, and everything that creeped upon the earth after his kind. And God saw that it was good.
Yeah.
And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that crept upon the earth. So God created man in his own image, in the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply, replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. And God said, behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed which is upon the face of the earth, and every tree in which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat. And to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that crept upon the earth, within there is life. I have given every green herb for meat, and it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And the evening and the morning were the sixth day.
Okay, so now we have the full creation account. And so, stopping on this day 6, God does something different than all the other days. He's created the heavens, he's created the earth, he's separated the expanse. Is it getting warm in here to you guys? I need to check our air because it feels like it has stopped. 1 second. Stopped. It had already risen 2 degrees. I have like this thermometer like built inside me. My wife will tell you, don't I? It's like I can go like this and I go, the temperature has gone up. It's kind of weird. It's like 73 is like this breaking point for my body. I can kind of feel it right in the middle. Anyway, that's
You're a human thermostat.
The flame on.
And we created those, it's a good money here.
So,
Okay.
God creates everything, right? Every living thing in 6 days, right? What can you tell me is different between man and woman and everything else that he's made?
You have dominion.
Okay. He says something unique about man and woman that he doesn't say. Yes, the
In his
dominion.
image.
Okay, now that's something worth some thought, some discussion. Now, also, when God is talking about creating man, does he use a singular word or a
It says
plural?
our.
Let us make man in our image, meaning a plurality. So that tells you that God is there because it says that God created. But yet, obviously, by the language, there's more than just, I don't know if I should say more than God there. There's more to God there than we might see. And to be honest with you, there's some things in here that until I read the New Testament and start stumbling across verses, some Old Testament verses, that this all of a sudden became aware. Because sometimes you can read something and really not note it and just kind of fly past it, you know, that there's a plurality there. God says, let us make man in our image. So God is not schizophrenic, but there's a plurality there, and we're going to look at what the Bible says about this plurality. But let's talk about this image for just a second. We all look very different, don't we? So, but there must be then something fundamentally similar about every one of us, even though we're different colors, sexes, and shapes, right? There's something that makes us distinctive because nothing else does he say our image. Something about God that has been given to us that is very different than the rest. What might you think it is? Again, no necessarily, there's not necessarily any wrong answers here.
Our heart,
Okay? What would you call that?
the love,
Hmm?
the love, our life, you know, that what gives us a life is
Okay?
Christ. And
Everything has a life force, right? Because when the life force is gone, what happens? Death occurs, right? So we all have a life force image. It's a difficult one.
Ándale, Miss
Several
Sonia.
things, really.
Miss Sonia said, it's
I say Jesus.
Jesus and the Spirit.
Interesting, okay?
That's okay.
Several things. He gave us emotions. We
Okay.
see as we read through the Bible, like God gets angry sometimes. He also gives us one thing, especially read this in the book of Ecclesiastes. He's put within us eternity. That's God's domain. But he has put eternity in us so that we could think of him.
Now, if you were to read 1 Corinthians 15, there's obvious description of a difference between the created things.
Mhm.
When he talks about the differences in the flesh or the
Right.
substance of, he says, fish have one kind of flesh,
Mhm.
others have this kind of flesh, and man has a different kind. So even the composition of what we're made of is different than, even though there are similarities, because we're all living upon within the same physical restraints on this earth, breath, carbon, etc. What do you think might make us different that is in the image of God? What are we essentially made of? Can you peg it into 3 different categories?
Body, soul, and spirit.
Okay. Or we can say
Mind,
mind,
Body,
soul, and spirit.
Yeah. Mind, soul,
Because
spirit.
everything has a body. Even though we're made up different. That there's something about our total composition that has something, an imprint, a fingerprint upon us that makes us distinctive. The fact that we have a mind, you just reason. When a bird comes out of the nest, does it have to go to school to fly south? The monarchs, how much time do they have to learn that they need to go to Mexico to spawn? Did you know about that? To replicate, to propagate, whatever you want to call it? They don't learn. It's built in them. They just do what they do because it's what they were built. What do? What makes us distinctive?
Reason.
We have a mind.
Reason.
A mind that can do what? Think. And it can reason. And it can specifically here, as we read in the account of Genesis, God puts something in the middle of the garden. And anyone know what it is? A tree. Actually more than one tree. But a tree that is meant for, it says, good and evil. It's the fruit of it can bring about the knowledge of good and evil. Right? And God says, don't eat it.
Don't touch it.
What is God doing? Is he tempting man to sin?
No.
Or what is he doing? That goes in line with our speciality. Part of the image that God has given us. Should I or shouldn't I?
Choice.
free will.
Is there consequence if I do? What did God say?
Yeah.
The day you eat it,
You die.
you die. So don't do it. So what is God doing?
Giving
He's
us
given you the exercising of a very distinctive part of your character and nature that none of the created world has. The sun comes up and it goes down. The world is spinning. It doesn't think about it, does it? The stars shine just like they're supposed to, right? It doesn't think it one day, oh, well, should I shine today or should I not? I don't feel like it. But we have been given a choice to do what? Will I do right? Will I do wrong? Will I choose to listen to God? Or will I choose to not?